A banner read, the Tunisian Interior Minister is fired. Two committees are formed to investigate corruption the army spreads within several cities, and demands for releasing some detainees. And actually, the Tunisian president yesterday ordered the release of many of the protesters who were detained over the past days.
Yeah. I actually think it's really interesting that this is front page, because a month ago when this started, when the protests originally began, when a young man who was unemployed, he actually committed suicide, there was absolutely no coverage about the issue. It was very under the radar. You only heard about it, through social media, through bloggers and activists and social media activists, so that its front page is really interesting. There were actually rumors yesterday morning that the president had actually been overthrown and that there had been a revolution. This was through social media. It turned out not to be true. It turned out to be this huge protest. I think around between 20 to 40 people died, depending if you're using eyewitnesses. Exactly.
23 and rights groups
exactly. And what I think is really interesting here is that the Minister of Interior was actually asked to step down, which I think was a step by the president to show that we're willing to take your considerations, the youth's considerations, into account. And
do you see this as a move by the president to absorb the anger by the protesters?
Definitely. And there's been similar calls here in Egypt over some protests that, these things have been happening. There should be steps taken as in response to what's happening. And especially if the parallels between the country and us, a very young population, under age of 25, a huge segment of the population, unrest over unemployment. There's a lot of similarities, and that's what happens. We can take it as an example of when there's a lot of unrest, these things boil over. So it will be very interesting to see how this develops.
Also on Al-Ahram's front page, we read Prime Minister Nazif says the national unity in Egypt is targeted and laws for strengthening citizenship will come out soon. The Muslims had expressed their readiness to form human shields to defend the churches. Back to the issue of Muslims and Copts in Egypt.
Yeah, I actually think it's really interesting. How can you really have a law to strengthen citizenship? For me, citizenship is it's an intangible concept. You can't really demand we feel citizenship. What we can do, though, is in terms of our media and in terms of our leaders and how they discuss, we're very much, we're all brothers and sisters, but you still feel there's still a lot of discrimination. There's still a lot of, even, you see with all the Muslims who went, and you felt a lot of it wasn't staged. There was this one photo of a woman in niqab at a church with her daughter that made all the round circulation. Look how incredible our unity is. But I'm hoping that it's not just superficial, that more initiatives are taking place, more projects, things that actually go beyond just the sayings that we're all unified. And again, with the events that happened yesterday and more protests, there were more protests yesterday, that this could escalate, and we want to tone things down and help put them on the right track rather than actually going in the other direction. So.
Okay, we'll tackle the issue of the shooting of Samalut later in another headline in Masr al-Yawm. But first, in Al-Ahram, the referendum in southern Sudan, Egypt expresses its deep concern for the incidents in Abyei.
Yeah, Sudan is where everyone's watching, because today's the fourth day, I think, of the actual voting. And yesterday they passed the 60% mark, which means that the results of the vote, it's valid, whatever they result in. The incidents, I think around 30 people were also died. This is the border of the north-south. And Abyei, they're actually going to have their own independent vote over whether they won the split or not. So yeah, definitely what's happening in Sudan affects us all, not just because, we want to grow our wheat, Egypt, not just because we want to grow our wheat in Sudan, but because, this is an African country, and I don't think I can actually remember the last time a country split into two, in not any time in recent history. So everyone around the world is watching to see what the possible ramifications and consequences will be, because whatever they are, other countries will probably take a cue from that, especially countries with similar, political or economic divisions. The South and the North, they've always had not just the religious divide between, the Christians in the South and the Muslim Arabs in the North, but between it's very tribal. There's 200 ethnic groups in the South, 4 tribal religions. There's very much an economic gap, between 1 in 10 children die in the South. 80% of people don't have access to actual latrines or bathroom, even though they have 80% of the oil and they have all the forests. So a lot of countries where there are very clear divisions will take whatever happens in Sudan as an example to see if it's going to be positive or negative, because even though everyone's playing it up as, this great thing and everyone's going to be independent, we could see another civil war. it could deteriorate in ways that we don't see, in ways that we can't see right now.
And in case the Southerners vote for independence as expected, it's seen as a foregone conclusion. Do you expect Abyei to remain the contentious issue, a bone of contention between the Northerners and the Southerners?
It does, because you know you have the migration. There was actually, I think yesterday, between the discussions, you know, the North didn't allow some of the Southerners to go back to pass through. So the South said, okay, then we won't allow the people who are migrating between. And you know, it could evolve into kind of, oh, you said this, we'll say, even if the agreements aren't decided upon beforehand, how they're going to deal with the oil, how they're going to deal, even though the president came out and said we're all brothers, and even if this happens, we're going to stay cordial, relations will stay cordial, it could be very easy after, khalas, they're an independent country, there's a clear border, now the border isn't very, you know, after there is a border, they could say, khalas, this is the way it is, and we're not going to actually do anything. So yeah, it could remain still.
To the incident of the Samalut shooting in Al-Masri al-Yawm, the main banner reads, the shooter in the Samalut incident in the Upper Egypt train says he does not know the victims and his psychological condition is the cause for the crime. Security sources say he was suffering from psychological disruptions and cannot be described as mentally disordered.
Yeah, the thing is, if he has psychological disruptions, why did he have a gun in the first place? That was my concern. You know, there's a lot of this is still developing the investigation. You have eyewitness accounts who says that no, he was actually looking for people who had a cross. They were, you know, he knew they were Christian because they had a cross on their hands. He himself said, no, I didn't know them. But as you can see from the result, you know, the protests yesterday, there were thousands protesting again, that people don't really buy this, or they don't really see what are the chances that this could have happened just very recently after, you know, we had the bomb that killed 23, which is the biggest, you know, incident in recent year targeting Copts. That again, a couple of weeks later, we could have another incident that's completely unrelated. But we'll see how it develops. Egyptian
authorities' confirmation yesterday that the incident is not religiously motivated.
Well, they said, but you know, people don't always believe what they hear, and a lot of people tell you know once it's been denied, that's when you believe it's true.
In a related issue, on the latest investigation on the Alexandria bombing, a security call regarding the mysterious head in the Alexandria bombing. The suspect is a Pakistani who entered Alexandria 3 days before the incident.
Yeah, I think this was actually the way they recognized him. They said that he'd actually been involved in a car accident, that he'd hit someone with a car, and then that person actually recognized him from the reconstructed photo that had been circulating. So perhaps, it would be interesting to see how this develops if this is confirmed, what Pakistan's response, because then that would be definitely, you know, a kind of, how did he come into Egypt? What was the aim between? Was this a part of a bigger plot? You know, we're very big on conspiracy theories. Whether this actually has a larger, is it an isolated incident, or it has larger considerations?
Moving to the latest in the occupied territories, another headline reads, the occupation troops launched 3 raids against Gaza and destroyed 17 Palestinian homes in Hebron. Leadership of Hamas in Damascus refuses contract between the National Authority and the Blackwater in the West Bank.
Yeah, and actually
escalation in Gaza Strip again.
Yeah, and Egypt actually just was yesterday discussing how warning that Israel, there could be very much what we had in 2008 with the Gaza war, that this could happen again, because I think just in the last 2 weeks there's been at least 20 rockets fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel, and this is a violation, you know, of the agreements, or that there shouldn't be. So
it was around the same time in 2008.
Exactly. This was it was mid-December.
Late December,
exactly.
till late
so just
January.
2 years. So Egypt was warning again that, you know, there's a possibility that this could deteriorate again. So just be careful and let's tone down. Let's not go down that path again, because no one wants that.
Okay. Let's move to Al-Wafd, the newspaper, which also tackled the Samalut shooting, the developments in Tunis. But we want to focus on the headline on the issue of the Vatican. The Vatican assures its agreement with Egypt to avoid sectarian escalation after the statements by Pope Benedict XVI and the subsequent recall of the Egyptian ambassador to the Vatican.
Yeah, I think also again the Pope today, there was actually this morning, he actually he said that he actually the ambassador is actually being sent back, because he said that no, we agree completely with what Egypt, the actions, how they've stressed the importance of the unity and how we deal with this issue.
Do you see it as a sort of retraction?
That's kind of retracted the statement. Because, you know, I don't know, yeah. He retracted the statement, perhaps because it's seen that Egypt is taking constructive steps towards dealing with the issue, that it's giving it enough attention, or that because the public is giving so much attention and that they're creating all this noise over what's happening, that the government has to take a step. They actually have to take initiatives to show that this isn't something that's just going to be, you know, brushed under the carpet like so many other incidents are.
Okay. On page 6 of Al-Wafd, the dangerous escalation in Lebanon, dangerous developments in Lebanon, Hezbollah and its allies announced the failure of the joint Saudi-Syrian initiative to solve the Lebanese crisis, and actually the government of Saad al-Hariri collapsed.
It collapsed, yesterday. And it's incredible how fast it happened. You know, they chose a very significant moment. They chose when the Lebanese Prime Minister was in D.C. to actually, so when he stepped in, the cabinet had actually been dissolved. You know, you had this is the March 8th alliance, which had you require a third of the cabinet plus one to resign for the order to cabinet to fall. So the 10 resigned and then one more did, which means there's no more cabinet. And you know, this happened because Hezbollah was protesting the UN tribunal against the assassination of Saad Hariri, and because that would have indicted several of Hezbollah members. They gave Prime Minister, they gave him until Wednesday, which was yesterday, to actually say no. But you know, the timing is very suspect because he wasn't even here. They knew that by Wednesday he wouldn't be there. So it kind of didn't make sense to put this as the deadline. But it will be very interesting, and actually this is extremely, it isn't just Lebanon. And you word on the street in Lebanon that there isn't much reaction, but that's probably because, you know, Lebanese are very used to the political instability. But this doesn't just affect Lebanon, because if Hezbollah does take over, then you have, they're backed by Iran and Syria. And if they're backed by Iran and Syria, they will probably launch a preemptive attack on Israel, and Israel wouldn't wait. They would launch a preemptive attack. And then you'd have tensions with Iran, because Iran would probably provide Hezbollah with weapons. You know, this could escalate very much, and then you have Syria. They withdrew their troops. Similar
to the atmosphere preceding the previous one of 2006?
Exactly. In 2006, we could very much again go back to that. And so yeah, so I think that this probably won't take a long time to resolve. We will see a decision being taken either or very quickly, because you can't leave it as it is right now, because you know, it will fire. There will be fire, there will be noise, there will be a lot of things which will impact everyone surrounding, all the countries surrounding.
Okay, away from Middle East politics to natural disasters, catastrophes.
2011 is very big.
Sweep throughout the world, 70 killed in floods within the peninsula in Australia, and an earthquake hits China. And today in our news bulletin we report about bad weather in the US and floods in Brazil.
Yeah, and you know what's happening, especially in Australia. It was Brisbane yesterday. I think the flooding reached a peak of like 5.5 meters or in the range, which is even worse than the flooding they had in 1974. It's estimated that I think 15,000 people at least will be impacted, and it'll cost $1.5 billion US. And there were footage I saw yesterday, you know, of not just the flooding, there's power outbreaks, there's snakes from the water, and they also had a big fire that destroyed thousands of acres of land. So yeah, national catastrophes. And yesterday I think was also the anniversary of Haiti. You had 1 year, and they have infections of cholera, 170,000 people infected with cholera. So yeah, so natural disasters, a lot of them. Hopefully hopefully we won't continue in this vein, inshallah.
Moving to Ashur newspaper, page 10 reports the Minister of Electricity says the nuclear tender is open for all international companies.
Yeah, I think that's an announcement that's made, and it would be interesting to see who actually takes it up after.
Okay. Also on the same page, for the first time since 20 years, the Prime Minister of Kuwait is in Baghdad, a serious development in Kuwaiti-Iraqi
Especially
relations.
Since yesterday there was a little bit of tension, you know, with there's an incident in the waters with, you know, there was an isolated incident yesterday which said that it could actually escalate Iraqi-Kuwaiti relations again. So the fact that he's there, considering the context and their background, is hopefully a good sign. We don't want things to escalate negative, especially since the region, there's been a lot of interesting developments in the past 2 weeks.
Okay. We wrap up our review with a look at the Dastur newspaper. On page 13th, the national team ends its training in preparation for its match with Kenya in the pre-final Nile Basin tournament. We don't want to talk sports, but let's talk politics. Nile Basin Countries Tournament, organized by Egypt at this time.
Yeah. And I think that basically the national team should use this as good practice for the African